Hi everyone, for this video I would like to discuss the process involved in waterproofing your basement space to make it ready for a brand new, dry, healthy, and comfortable second suite. Before we spend potentially over $100,000 to turn a basement space into a legal second dwelling unit, we want to ensure that the space is perfectly dry first. This is because the last thing we want to do is to have to rip it apart and redo a majority of it due to water damage. Now, before we get started, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and share this video with someone you think who might be interested. Also, share your comments and questions below. Now, even though our main point of discussion is to talk about basement waterproofing, the majority of basement suites aren't actually waterproofed. That's because more likely than not, they don't actually need to be. Most water leakage issues in basement spaces can be addressed at the exterior of the house. This is accomplished by ensuring that water is properly managed outside. This means checking that your gutters and downspouts are working properly to redirect rainwater away from the property. If there are any cracks in the foundation walls, make sure they are properly sealed. And keep plants and flower beds away from the house. Most importantly, the grading around the property must be sloped away from the house, avoiding any accumulation of water against the foundation. For more details on this, check out a previous video I made called Steps to Take Before Waterproofing Your Basement. This video covers all the things you can do to mitigate water leakage into your basement. Okay, so assuming you've done everything you can on the outside, but you're still having water issues in the basement. This could be one of many reasons. Your basement may be near or part of an area with a higher water table, meaning water may be coming from underground. Your foundation wall may be older and constructed of a more porous material such as stone, brick, or masonry blocks. You may have homes in close proximity to other homes where you're unable to improve the grading to direct rainwater away properly. There may be areas surrounding the property that are difficult to change significantly because you don't own the property, and in a heavy rainstorm, some of that water will make its way in. So in some instances, it may be wise to also supplement exterior work with waterproofing as well. So for our current project here, we actually had difficulty redirecting all the water away from one of our neighbors and our own rear yard. So we will be taking steps to improve that on the outside as much as possible. But given the age of this home and the older foundation wall, we decided to incur the additional cost of waterproofing the basement as well. When waterproofing, there's two ways to go about it, either exterior or interior. Using the exterior method, the soil around the exterior of the foundation wall would have to be dug up all the way to the footing. And the drain at the footing, also known as a weeping tile, may need to be added or repaired. A waterproofing membrane is attached to the exterior of the foundation wall and the soil is then backfilled. This is the ideal method. It involves excavation, which can be challenging depending on the site and can sometimes compromise the structure of the house as well. It is typically also more expensive than the method that we chose, which is the interior waterproofing method. So now I'll take you guys around this property where we perform the interior waterproofing method around the entire foundation wall. All right, so right now I'm going to go over the interior waterproofing method. Okay, so the way we've done it here is really the most common method that's done. We have a dimpled plastic waterproof membrane that is attached to the wall. And basically, any water that makes its way through this foundation wall, it's going to go to the bottom. We've dug a trench underneath, so you can kind of see this concrete here that got patched up. So under there, we dug a trench and then there was a weeping tile. And that surrounds the entire foundation. And it's basically redirects any water around the perimeter of the foundation, takes it to a sump pump in the back, which I'm going to show you guys later, and redirects that water to the outside. Now, just talking a little bit about how this is applied. This is applied by screwing Tapcon screws or using a ramset gun to ensure that it stays attached to the foundation wall. A lot of cases, it's not recommended to use a ramset gun because you could damage a big chunk of the foundation wall, so you don't want to do that. So what they've done here is that they've attached Tapcon screws. So these screws can actually go right on the concrete, and you can see these orange squares here that spreads out that attachment to make sure that it stays on. Okay? So this is really interior waterproofing in a nutshell. You have this membrane here. Any water that's able to get through, even though we're going to try to take care of the water from the outside, any water that gets through, it goes into the trench, where there's a weeping towel and gravel around it, and then that water gets directed to a sump pump. Whenever it accumulates, that's going to get discharged to the outside, okay? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about this actual waterproofing membrane itself. There are several options. We went with the tried and true method, which is just a 1/4 inch dimpled plastic, right? So this, again, attaches to the wall, and any moisture or water has a little bit of a gap to trickle through. There are a lot of more innovative products out there right now. So for example, there's also a liquid application that you can apply, which is sort of like an antimicrobial membrane that is a liquid that you apply on with a roller, kind of like paint. Some people have had success with that, and I just don't know long-term how effective that's going to be, because if you're trying to prevent the water from actually getting through there, is that going to compromise the foundation in the long run, right? Another method is a self-adhering layer. You may have heard of Blue Skin. I've seen that being used as well, and a lot of people say that it's a great product. Again, if there's no gap between that membrane and the wall, what happens to that water over time, I'm not sure, right? So again, we just stuck to the old method, which is to have a dimpled plastic and having that water directed into the trench. You know, this dimpled plastic is very versatile. This can be used for exterior waterproofing as well. We also use this material on the floors in many cases, where we will lay this on top of the concrete floor and just have our vinyl plank flooring or other type of flooring directly over top of it. And that provides a little bit of a gap, gives a little bit of insulation to the floor, and also if there's any moisture, that can get redirected to the floor drain. All right, so that wraps up the membrane itself. So next I'm going to talk about applying the insulation into this wall space. Okay, so now let's talk about the insulation as it relates to this waterproofing. Now, there are several ways to insulate your basement. You can use blanket insulation, you can use bats insulation. In our case, what we're doing is we're using a spray foam insulation. The reason for that is that we just get a lot more R value, which is basically thermal insulation value for the depth of that stud wall. And when you apply insulation, if it's going to be bats insulation or blanket insulation, there's no real issues with the wall surface. Obviously, you need to have a moisture barrier of some type, but it gets a little bit trickier when you use a spray foam insulation. Now, with this dimpled plastic, the insulation itself is not going to adhere very well to this plastic. However, when you have these studs and you apply that spray foam, it's going to expand, and the pressure itself is going to push right against this, so it's not going to be an issue at all. Sometimes people will spray foam foundation walls that are there's no moisture barrier, or it may even be damp or wet. That's definitely not a good idea, because you're definitely going to get mold and potentially structural damage on your foundation wall if there's moisture between your insulation and the foundation wall. So having this is good, even though the insulation itself, it's not, it's plastic, so it doesn't adhere to it very well. That pressure that is exerted by the joist here, that's actually going to support it. You can notice that there's also a gap here between the studs. Right now we're required to put in R20 insulation, and a portion of that insulation actually has to be continuous under the current Ontario Building Code. So we're going to have actually R23 insulation in here. It's going to go pretty close to the edge of the outside of the studs, and then there's going to be 2 inches. You see this wall here sitting proud from the edge of the foundation wall and the plastic by about a couple of inches, right? So this ensures that we get that continuous insulation back here. When it comes to costs, it seems like it just makes more sense these days from a labor and material perspective to do spray foam, and also, of course, the space savings that you have, right? So that's what we're doing. That's what we recommend if it's possible to spray foam. The basement here is going to end up being very cool in the summer and definitely very warm in the winter. All right, guys, so that covers insulation. What I'm going to do next is show you the staircase and how we're dealing with the waterproofing around that area. Okay, so one part that's going to be a little bit tricky is the waterproofing around the staircase. Now, obviously you're in a basement suite, and there's going to be a staircase that's leading down into the basement. So when you do a waterproofing membrane, you're not able to get around the entire basement because of that staircase, right? In our situation here, we had a really old staircase that we had to redo anyways. And so it was okay. It made sense for us to have this waterproofing wrapped around it. But in most cases, it probably wouldn't make sense for you to do that, unless you wanted to go through the process and the additional expense of doing a brand new staircase. So in a lot of situations, you're really just going to get as close as you can to the edge and then continue that waterproofing underneath and behind the staircase. But your waterproofing company may not warranty if there's any sort of leakage in that area, right? So that's going to be sort of the trade-off. That's something to be aware of for all basement suites, is if you have to do interior waterproofing around that staircase that's going into the basement. All right, so the last point that we're going to cover is the sump pump, so let's head over there. All right guys, so here's the sump pit and pump that is located in the back corner of our property. So you want to position it in a place that is obviously close to the exterior wall, in an area that you can discharge it so that that water is going to be draining away from the property, right? So sometimes it's in the front of the house, sometimes it's on the sides, but usually that's less the case, because on the sides of the house, you're either going to be in close proximity to your neighbor or you're in a driveway, right? So it usually makes sense to be either in the front or in the back. So this pit right now is covered up. There is a pump inside, and you can see this tube here, right? So once there's enough water that accumulates in here, from the outside or from underground, that's going to get directed from the trench and the weeping tile in there into this pump, and it's going to discharge out. And we have it discharging several feet away from the back of the foundation wall. Okay, and so this is just going to run automatically. And from time to time, some people living in the house, you're just going to hear that pump running, right? And obviously, if there's a big rainstorm and there's water getting in from the outside, or if you're in a high water table, some of that water can be coming from underground, and this is going to be discharging. Most new houses these days will actually have these installed just kind of as a backup, right? Even though with a new house you have good waterproofing, it just makes sense to have this installed, to deal with water issues, right? Like, lately we've been getting so many issues with rain, extreme rainstorms and things like that. So it does actually make a lot of sense. All right. Okay, so that covers interior waterproofing in a nutshell, which is a common method for helping to mitigate basement water leakage that's getting ready to be converted to a legal second suite. Again, you need to make sure to address all water issues from the exterior, but in some cases, it makes sense to have the waterproofing as well, especially if the house is much older. So what are your thoughts? Have you ever completed any interior or exterior waterproofing for a basement suite, or even just a finished space? Do you think it's worth doing? Let me know if you have any additional suggestions for keeping that basement second suite nice and dry. So we hope this video was helpful. Please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you once again for watching. Until next time, to your success. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to learn more about investing in housing densification and how you can get involved, hit that subscribe button. I put together a beginner's guide and also a handy 8-point checklist that covers everything you need to know about adding a legal second suite. We cover important bylaw and building code requirements for cities in Ontario and all the design considerations you need to make to successfully complete your project. You can download that through the link in the description below. Until next time, to your success.